Hello, friends. Tonight on the podcast, we welcome a very special guest indeed. Director David Carson helmed some of the finest hours of the Granada Sherlock Holmes series. His credits include The Blue Carbuncle, The Resident Patient, The Musgrave Ritual, and The Six Napoleons. With the help of our incomparable producer friend, David Yule, Luke and I were able to chat with Mr. Carson via Zoom a few weeks back, between preparations for his new film, Heartland, which begins shooting in New Zealand later this year. In addition to his work on the Granada series, Carson has famously directed dozens of film and television projects over the years, including what is generally accepted as the very best episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, Yesterday's Enterprise. And he also directed the feature film Star Trek Generations, where he had the controversial distinction of killing off Captain James T. Kirk. But the topics of our conversation were Jeremy Brett, Carson's time at Granada, and the work he did on the adventures and the return of Sherlock Holmes. And it will probably come as no surprise that he shares our deep love of Mr. Brett's portrayal of the character and his incredible skills as a creative artist. It was truly a pleasure to speak with this incredible filmmaker. So without any further ado, we give you David Carson. Well, first of all, David Carson, thank you so much for doing this today. How has lockdown been treating you in LA?
They're just releasing small things like restaurants and stuff like that, because I think the governor's feeling under pressure. So you can probably think we'll probably have another surge and a spike in about 3 weeks' time.
Yeah.
We should still stay locked down till it's all done. So here we are, lockdown.
Well, I guess let's dive in. We like to start at the very beginning. So were you a Sherlock Holmes fan as a kid?
Yes, I was a Sherlock Holmes fan at the beginning, but not an avid one. You know, I enjoyed the stories. I liked reading Conan Doyle.
Well, the Granada series was one of your earliest gigs as a television director, but could you tell us a little bit about what you were up to at that point in your career, just kind of prior to coming on board with the Blue Carbuncle, which I guess that would have been around 1984?
Yes, before that I was a theatre director. I directed two of our regional theatres in England, the Leeds Playhouse and the Marlow Theatre Canterbury, for a few years. And we did a huge variety of plays, all from all around the world, about 50 plays. And I found as I became an artistic director that I really wasn't enjoying it very much. I didn't want to be an artistic director dealing with boards and play runs and things like that. I wanted to be directing and writing. And so we came back to London, and a lot of the people I'd worked with formed a company on the Fringe in London, went to the Edinburgh Festival, won an award there. And then I got an offer to go to Granada TV. What Granada TV used to do was it used to have its in-house directors. And they used to reckon that prominent theatre directors, if they could get them onto their team and teach them how to do TV, they would have much better product in the drama area. So I was one of those.
Interesting.
And I went in there thinking to myself, you know, quite grandly, oh, I'm a leading theatre director in England now, so I'll get to do all their best series. And they said, no, you're going to start down there directing the local news on the TV there. You're going to do interviews and you're going to do weather. So that's how I started. And it was a great learning experience, because also the crews at Granada, who were the guys who were always running the studios, loved to see new theatre directors coming in with grand ideas of themselves. You know, as a theatre director, you know what every piece of equipment looks like that's hanging on the grid and things like that. You're a complete stranger when you're coming up against the TV world.
Right.
And being taken into a control room for the first time was really interesting, because here we were in a control room and there were 4 monitors with 4 cameras down on the floor. And the supervisor said, all right, I want you to move one of the cameras down to the other end of the studio and set it up for an interview. So I had my 4 cameras, A, B, C, D, and I said, okay, so can the camera on my right move to the end of the studio? And the camera on my left waggled. And I went, oh, okay. And then a northern voice came out and said, The cameras are numbered on top, love. A, B, C, and D. Call us by A, B, C, and D. Okay, can the camera D? Anyway, that's how I started in TV in England, and it was a wonderful situation because I not only did the news, I started doing music videos, I did documentaries in different parts of the world, and then came to do a situation comedy and started to work on film. And Sherlock Holmes at Granada was one of the first dramas that I did on film, which was a great thing to do.
Yeah. So it came about very organically then. So how exactly, though, did the Blue Carbuncle fall into your lap? Did you have to petition for that job, or did they pick you out?
No, they basically they picked me out. I was there with 3 or 4 directors. We had to go through the various things like doing soap operas, like the famous Coronation Street,
Yeah.
which I did for some time. And you had to fulfill everything that you had to stay on budget, shooting schedule, and all that. So it was a learning experience, really.
Yeah.
And a couple of my mates fell aside. And then there was the time when the producers were asked if they would take one of us or 2 of us to direct some of their major series work. And they picked me, and I landed the Blue Carbuncle, not by choice. I was picked and thrown into the melee.
So I guess let's just, I might as well ask you right up front, Jeremy Brett, how was it working with him for the first time?
Well, it was sort of like a dream come true, because when I was 15, I went to London with my school as an outing, and we went to see Hamlet in the West End, which was being played by Jeremy Brett. This was the first time I'd ever heard of Jeremy Brett. And we went back to school, us 15 and 16-year-old boys, and all we did was imitate Jeremy's performance and try to get somebody to let us act and do things like that. So when I first met Jeremy, which was at the Blue Carbuncle, I remember doing that thing of saying, I've been a fan of yours for so long. I saw you play Hamlet when I was a 16-year-old schoolboy. And he looked at me and he went, I don't think we want to talk about that. I think I'd made a boo-boo with the age thing.
We've all done it. Yeah.
Yes, but to my mind, he's one of the most complete film actors and stage actors I think I ever had the privilege to work with. I have undying admiration for him. He taught me an enormous amount, not by saying, go over there and do this, but by the way he was and the way he acted, which was quite remarkable. And I haven't really ever come across that kind of behavior from a leading actor in a TV series since, in spite of all the stuff that I've done.
Yeah.
He was like, he came from an era where there were actor managers, there were ancient professional, actors who would come on stage and proclaim, who had their own companies. And so for Jeremy, what we were doing as Sherlock Holmes was his own company. He had 2 crews, and he encouraged them all the time, looked after them, thought about his crews, and was like a big uncle to people. One of the examples that I remember giving him some notes on the set of maybe the Blue Carbuncle or one of the others, and he said, David, one moment. And he just scuttled off to the side of the stage, which was sort of empty, where there was a young lad who'd just arrived and was sweeping the floor. And he went over to him and he introduced himself. And of course, the guy was very impressed. And he said, no. I want to tell you that what you're doing, your job here is very, very important. And you're doing it wonderfully well. Nice to meet you. And come back again. And you go, wow, that kid must have thought, what a wonderful present to give. But he bound the companies who did the Sherlock Holmes films together like that. He basically had 2 camera teams, for example. And on the first day of rehearsal, we'd come in and he'd go, my A camera team. You are, of course, the best camera team. And we would all go, yeah, well, that's exactly what you say to the other guys too. But he was like that. He was responsible for himself, but let it be known he was responsible for us all too. So it was a really, really interesting situation.
That's wonderful.
He was also an extraordinary actor for the camera. He knew where everything was. He would hold the Blue Carbuncle up in front of his face, or the cross in the Musgrave Ritual. He would know exactly where the focus was. He didn't have to be told. He would just put it there. So he would know exactly what was going on. And he had this extraordinary ability to know where the camera was, where his audience was, and to always include the camera in his work. Very interesting and brilliant actor, I felt.
Yeah. Sticking with the Blue Carbuncle for a moment, that was an early episode. Jeremy was famously, by his own admission, still finding the character to some extent.
Yes.
But Did you find you were directing him in the direction of the character at all, or was it really all Jeremy bringing that character? Did you find you were kind of pushing him in certain directions?
I don't think pushing is the right word. I think collaborating with him was the right word.
Yeah.
Because he was a very collaborative person, and he'd worked with some of the greatest directors in the world, and so he knew exactly where he was going with the character. But he also welcomed, a way of staging a scene or something, or a way of, particularly in the Six Napoleons, where we did some humor and stuff like that for a while, and being able to use the staging that I did to actually fill with his character and with new things for him and different things that he could do, which perhaps weren't in the script. Like again in the Six Napoleons, when he does the magic trick of pulling the tablecloth off the table, and all of those kinds of things, which he felt broadened the character and the way that he wanted to play it. And you're right, he was discovering it in the Blue Carbuncle. I mean, there weren't many episodes, I don't think, where he didn't have his hair done and everything, and he was just out of bed and stayed like that for a long time. And you could see where the character was underneath the floppy hair and everything. And it was, pretty brilliant. Well, as you can see, I'm quite a fan of Jeremy Brent's.
Well, we are too.
Yeah, hard not to be. How much control did you have over things like casting on these shows? I guess probably not so much on the first one, but other things like locations. Was that all preordained by Michael Cox and his team, or did you get to have input on that stuff?
No, Michael gave us huge amounts of freedom. So I could bring in some of the actors I've been working with in the theater, and I think they're in all of the episodes. Basically, Michael left it to us and the casting director. We had a couple of really good casting directors, and we managed to get some of the best actors who were working in England at the time, which was great.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
So I don't know if you know about Jeremy's. Of course you do. You're an expert on Jeremy, about his sort of relationship with Ingmar Bergman, which was very, very interesting to a director who loves working with actors. Do you know about these stories?
A little bit, and I would love to hear you talk about it because I love Ingmar Bergman as well.
This was a conversation that we had probably many times, but when you're working with Jeremy, there are certain things that he does, and sometimes they run counter to what you want him to do. And one of these things is the good old-fashioned television over-the-shoulder shot.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very difficult always to get Jeremy to not turn half his face towards the camera when you were trying to get an over-the-shoulder shot of him. And so I asked him about that. He said, well, you see, I can't help it because of what I was taught by Ingmar Bergman. The question for Ingmar Bergman was, you know so much about what I do and what Jeremy does because you had your wonderful theater company, and then you started to make films, and you used all your theater company actors, and none of them had been film actors. So how was it that you managed to get them to change? And he told this story, and forgive me if you've heard it before. He said, the way I did it was I told my actors that being in front of the camera is exactly the same as being on stage. You have to know where your audience is.
Right.
So when you are in a theater, in a proscenium arch theater, and you're on a stage, you're very, very aware. 25% of you is aware of your audience. You know about the person who coughs in the back row every time you crack a joke. You know about the woman down in the front row who's constantly undoing candies and sweets and things. And you know exactly what your audience is doing. Even if you turn your back on them and you walk up stage, you are still using your emotion, your feeling, your body and everything to communicate with that audience. Problem is, with the camera, who's the audience? He said, it is definitely not the director.
Mm-hmm.
It is definitely not the people standing around there. And if they laugh when you do something, be suspicious of it. Your audience is down the lens in the square matte box.
Right.
And that's who you play to. And you play to that all the time. You're always aware of where it is. You know where your hands are in the shot. You know the size of the lens so that you can communicate with them. So you can understand. If somebody puts the camera behind me, Jeremy would say, my whole feeling of the part of my audience, my 25%, is over my shoulder, being aware of that camera behind me, because that's where my audience is. And if you never forget that, then you have a total connection with your audience.
Right.
And the older actors, I mean, the great stars of the past, all knew that. But that was mainly because they did all their close-ups on their own. Like the famous stories about how Elizabeth Taylor would come onto the set and go to the camera and put her hand on it and say, "Good morning, camera," before she said hello to anybody else, because that camera was where her audience was. And I think that what Jeremy's experience with Ingmar Bergman was a hangover from all of that, which sadly we have lost today.
Right.
And that's why a lot of our dialogue scenes are sort of clunky, because they don't work as well as they should if you knew where your audience was.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. I mean, you may or may not be aware of this, but the Blue Carbuncle is actually considered to be one of the best episodes of this series, and is very beloved by the fans of this show. In fact, it's like a holiday standby for millions of people.
Great. I'm honored.
How was it received back then, though? Do you recall? Was it it wasn't released seasonably, as I've read. It came out in the summer or something like that. But was it received well?
As far as I know,
yeah,
it was received well. I mean, when you're working in a studio system like that, you sort of you're on to the resident patient or wherever you are then, and you're happy that it's gone out and everybody seems to be happy with it. But I'm not really aware of how other people, other than the people who got in touch with me afterwards or said that was great or whatever,
right.
I actually thought about it. I mean, I have an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called Yesterday's Enterprise, which is one of the favorites of the fans. And nowadays, you absolutely knew that was what the reaction to that was as soon as it happened.
Yeah.
And it's continued. But it was sort of different for me anyway. I wasn't really aware of it. And it was my first important movie that I'd done. Important for me, with period and actors and wonderful script and things like that. So I was sort of wrapped up in getting ready for the Musgrave Ritual, which I think was next on my slate.
Or the Resident Patient.
Oh, it was the Resident Patient. Sorry.
Yeah. So you were already getting ready for Resident Patient as soon as Blue Carbuncle ended.
I think so. Yes. I mean, we had a very different way of doing it from the American way of doing it, because Jeremy insisted that there should be 2 weeks gap between the finishing of one episode and the start of the next, and that 2 weeks could be occupied with rehearsals, or it would stretch to 3. So there would be a gap where we didn't sort of just roll from one episode into the other, as tends to be the way of doing it in America, and understandably why, and that both ways are understandable. So we had more time to do it. So of course I was finishing the Blue Carbuncle and going, am I going to get another one? Give me another one.
Right.
and I got the next one, which was the Resident Patient, which was also difficult.
Yeah.
But the Blue Carbuncle, I love the Blue Carbuncle. Frankly, it's got some great actors in it, and it's a terrific story, I think.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic.
And Jeremy's not wearing his hair slicked back. He's much less formal than usual.
Right. Kind of moving into the Resident Patient, then we're on record as stating that is again one of our favorite episodes of the series. But the beginning of that episode is quite remarkable and quite striking in and of itself. Maybe the single greatest production moment of the series, in our view.
Thank you.
And I'm talking, of course, about that very long dolly and crane shot up into the window.
Yes.
I mean, it's so cinematic, and the music and how everything works together so amazingly in that moment. It's magical. But tell us a little bit about that one, about the production on the Resident Patient. How did it compare to Blue Carbuncle? How had the show changed, if it had at all, by that point? I mean, from the viewer's point of view, a bit of time elapses between when the Blue Carbuncle aired and the Resident Patient aired. But I suppose if you were making them back to back, maybe it was the same.
Well, each movie was different. I mean, the Blue Carbuncle had its sort of opening with the carbuncle and finding the carbuncle, but the Resident Patient was different. It was the first time I sort of made a suggestion or interfered with the opening of the movie, and you can see probably from the way the opening of the movie went that was sort of part of a homage to Ingmar Bergman.
Yeah, absolutely.
and through Glass Darkly. But it was concealed, so it wasn't too much of a thing. But I think there was a massive difference because I was learning. I mean, I had been running around the studio for 2 years doing the news and recording bands that came to Manchester and shooting documentaries and stuff like that, and Coronation Street and sitcoms. And here I was learning about, how to make movies. And although we all think that we know that, it's actually really, really difficult. And the interesting thing that happened there, and which when I came here, I was able to compare it with, was that the people I was working with, the crew, the cinematographer, all the people were absolutely top of the line and knew what they were doing. So I was able to, in a way, to learn from them. The situation in England certainly is that the making of a movie is a collaborative venture, which I haven't experienced so much in my work in America, where it's meant to be the director's vision and you do what you're told. To me, that doesn't work for me at all, because I was brought up in an area, in a thing where the treatment that I was describing I got from the cameraman in the studio when I first arrived actually carried on in the movies.
Yeah.
And I was not spared by these brilliant people who worked on the crew for making fun of me publicly and making sure that I knew I had made a mistake or anything like that. I mean, we didn't in those days have video or anything like that to help us, so we had to do it between us. But I very often made mistakes, which I was basically,
brought to task.
Yeah, absolutely, and rightly, because over my 4 movies, I think it was in the Musgrave Ritual that I won them over.
Right.
By doing the prep that I should have been doing all the time, but I didn't know I had to, and doing it in the detail I had to do it in, and facing those kinds of things. The idea was kick him along, just teach him.
Right.
And I was quite young then, and so I was a bit shy about some of the things that I did. And the unit worked like a unit does work. You go through it and you do it, and as far as everybody's concerned, you get the lines right, the cameras move right, everything like that. In those days, it was cut and print, and we moved on. I was doing a shot with, or a scene with Jeremy and Edward Hardwick, and it was at the beginning of a shoot, and we did 2 takes of it, and it was okay, but I didn't think the performance was very good. So everybody went, I said cut, and everyone looked at me as if to say, are we moving on? And I said, no, we need to do another take. And I also said, I'm sorry, I know this holds us up a bit, and I'm sorry, but I just need to do another take because I need to work with the actors a little bit. And the cinematographer, who was a really, really great guy called Ken Morgan, he said to the crew, okay, just take 5. I need to talk to the director. And he put his hand on the back of my neck as if I was a kid, and he marched me off the set. And he said to me, look, you have to understand about this. You can't, and you should never study to be as good a cinematographer as I am. You will never understand how the wheels on the dolly work. You probably will never be as good a gaffer as I have. You'll never do any of these parts well. But if you don't get the performances right, we look like idiots. So never apologize for going for another take because of performance. A tremendous lesson.
Right.
To be told, and in private. He didn't do that in public.
Yeah.
So I was, learning in England was about being smacked around if you didn't get it right by your betters who you were working with and were meant to be junior than you.
Right.
So that's how it was. And so the next, when we came to do the Blue Carbuncle outside in some of the exterior shots, the operator would say to me, okay, so you want a master shot? Where do you want it? And I would go, from here, we'll look from here. And he went, here, right here? And I said, yeah, would say yes. And he'd say, okay, lads, put the track down here. Where do you want the track to finish? And I go, over here. Okay, so and they'd load the camera and go, what lens? And I go, 50 millimeter. And he looked at his guys and they grinned. And I went, 35? But I had to get it right. And he made me set the shot up. With everybody watching, which in retrospect was an incredible gift, because I don't have to worry about that anymore, because I just get the best people to do it with me and give them their freedom to do what they're going to do. All I need to worry about is acting and directing.
That's interesting that you say that too, because Gus and I dabble in film on the side, and It is different, I think, over here than it is in England. And I've heard stories similar to this. And I actually thought you were going to go in a whole different direction when the guy grabbed you by the neck. Because over here, I feel like it would have been a much more negative story the way it ended. But we kind of notice those things. We notice like lensing and things. We talk about that on the podcast. But in this episode in particular, there were things that stuck out, like these dolly shots and the crane shots and the lighting in this episode.
Right.
And I wondered if you could talk about that. Just there's a lot of single shots for an entire scene, and long dolly shots, and that move in and out, and you're focusing on different pieces. And I wondered how much of that was you bringing that maybe from theater, kind of directing the audience in a way.
Yeah, and a follow-up question to that I've always wondered about is, do you find that when you do those long shots, the one that comes to mind at the moment is the Six Napoleons morgue shot, which is, it's one single shot. Do you find that you save time by doing it in one shot? Do you find that it takes more time to get that one shot perfect, or do you find that it balances out and it would be the same either way?
Well, I mean, it's sort of horses for courses, really. It depends. Whether it would take more time or not. It's very, very difficult to quantify time, I find. And I'm not one of those people who quantifies it. I sort of go for what I think is right for the feel of the scene and the acting and all of that. And I try to, when I do a so-called master shot, and I think this is what I learned from the English guys, is that the whole shot needs to encompass the entire scene. And it needs to contain its own close-ups and close moments, and then back off and come and be moving, so that basically your camera is always moving. Your camera moves with the actor, depending on how the actor's mood is going, what it's doing. Your camera should be reflecting that with the actor, so you get the right size frame and things like that. That was one of my mantras. But I was looking at all the great filmmakers of the time, of course, and trying to copy them. Like there's a deliberate homage to Francois Truffaut in the Six Napoleons. I copied a shot of his because I wanted to see how the hell he did it in which movie? Atlantic City, when Susan Sarandon's being spied on from the opposite window. I wanted to see how that worked, and I could go to the crew and the line producer and say, look, I think that this movie would start really great with one of my funny little scenes that I do. But I really want to give homage to Truffaut. How the hell did he do this shot? So we went and did this incredibly complicated shot with moving walls and tracks and dummies and all that kind of thing to find out how it was. Because he, in that shot, which I admit that I copied, but actually it's a homage to him. He told the story in one shot, and it was such a complex little story. So that's the way that I try to get the camera working with the actors, so that it has the feeling of the scene and it has what it does, and the operator and the people who are close to the actors are able to help them and give them a platform to stand on, because of course that's what their performance does. It relies on us to bring them forward and bring them out, and with things like that.
Right. Well, I want to bring this one back to the resident patient for just a moment, because I have a question. I've always been a huge fan of the music in this episode, and the Blue Carbuncle, if I'm being honest. But how closely did you get to work with Patrick Gowers on the scores, kind of generally, and what was the relationship like for the director with the composer on this show?
Well, for me, it was really good. I thought he was just a wonderful, wonderful composer, and he added such wonderful things to everything. I'll give you a little example about the resident patient and the crane shot you talked about. In the barber shop, tapping away at Beethoven's sonata. Yeah. I can't remember exactly what it is, but he's singing that and humming that and everything. And I was doing the crane shot from the other side of the street. And unfortunately, behind the blind, there was no set. So I had to try to time the camera to get into the blind at the right point, so that we could open the blind and at the same time do a dissolve into the studio,
right?
Which is pretty sort of straightforward. But for me, it was difficult because I wasn't able to see a video. I just had to do all my timings and everything, my directing timings, standing behind the camera and guessing where the lens was that is going to take them in the right place. So I was too tentative with this shot. It took forever for the crane to get across the road, and forever for it to get up the building, and forever to, So I just threw caution to the wind and said, okay, we'll do one more shot of take of this. And we went faster, but we didn't go fast enough. So I remember talking to the editor about it and saying, it's a bit, it's too slow. It needs more pace. And if you'd seen it, just sitting there as a raw shot, you go, my God, where are we going? We don't know what's going to happen here.
Mm-hmm.
But what Patrick did was Patrick made the shot work because he simply extended the music, or whatever it was, and lifted the crane with the music up into the air and through the window. And without that music, technically, it wouldn't have worked as a shot.
Yeah.
It would have just been laid there like a piece of slab of meat on a plate. But he saw what the problem was. So instead of going, oh, I didn't plan to do any music here, I may have said to him, I'm awfully worried about this shot, which I think is boring. He just took it, and full orchestra took that camera up the wall. It was great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Gave him a window to work in.
Yes. That's right.
Speaking of music, I do have a little question I have to ask. Jeremy plays the violin at the end of this episode, but he didn't actually play. What was it like directing Jeremy to play the violin, knowing that he wasn't playing actual music? And I bring this up because in the Six Napoleons at the very end, he's actually playing his own theme song.
That's right.
And was he planning to do that, or was that something that Patrick Gowers threw in there as a surprise to everyone? I mean, he's bowing the instrument in a way that seems to indicate he knew he'd be playing the series music.
He did take lessons.
Yeah,
he knew we were going to shoot it from the back, so it had to be that shot. And he, as you notice in the Resident Patient, he turns around just before it finishes, so that he can, because he was desperate to show everybody that he'd learned how to play the violin. Actually, it made a terrible noise, but his fingers were all in the right place and the bow was at the right thing, so it sort of worked.
Yeah.
That was how that happened. And what happened, he was taught the pieces of music he had to mime to.
Okay. Very neat. Well, by the time you came back for appearance number 3, the Musgrave Ritual.
Oh, you didn't talk about Rafifi at all. I thought you were talking about Rafifi.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it, because we've talked about it at length, and it's one of our favorite sequences in the entire series. So let's definitely talk about it. Let's take a moment. You have a question you want to ask, Luke?
So speaking of working with a crew and with a committee, how did you get away with 3 minutes of no dialogue on a TV show back then?
That's sort of I just did it. I don't think they knew what I was up to.
Yeah.
And I just, I mean, in the script, it's just he walks around the room looking at it and so on and so forth. But I just thought, here's an opportunity to show what he actually does.
Yeah.
And of course, talking to Jeremy about it, he then turned it into this wonderful balletic movement. The extraordinary, captivating way that he performed it was what made it. And we planned, where the cigar ash was going to go and how it took him around the room and all of that kind of thing. But nobody knew we were going to do that, because they, in England, the producers are all hands off.
Yeah.
They give you at the end of the Musgrave Ritual, I had a conversation with the producer, which was very helpful to me. But here in Rafifi, they let us do it. Their big concern in that whole scene, the whole setup, was the fact that he's hanged himself. I don't know if you know about this.
Right. Yeah.
You do?
Censors and so on. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we had a lot of problems with that. But that, yeah. So Rafifi was not. Nobody knew about it at the beginning of. I think it's the Six Napoleons. There's a shot where they're all around the fire, and the camera pans from one to the other and back again, and there's no dialogue and no cuts, or very little dialogue. It's, oh, what are you thinking about? Oh, really? Okay, well, goodbye. And I did that knowing that there might be a problem with it, so I actually covered it by making sure I could cut it. But they loved it.
Yeah.
They just loved it because it gave the atmosphere of the thing. And they'd never seen Jeremy or Sherlock actually deduce all his stuff and give the audience clues about where it was going.
In real time.
Yes. Jeremy did get annoyed with the dialogue, though, about the cigars. And we had a little moment there where I was watching it, because he was talking about the ones were short and ones were long, and these came from Morocco and those did whatever it was. And he got tangled up sometimes in the lines. And I remember when he'd done the take a few times and got it almost right, I had to go across to him and say, "We need to do another one, Germany." He went, "What? Why? It was perfect. What are you talking about?" I said, "No, you got 3 little words are wrong." "Oh, 3 little words? Well, you can cut somewhere else." I go, "No, this is a 2-shot. It's happening." He would go, "Oh, well, just because it's you, David. All right then." and then he, of course, he was perfect, having blown that out of his system.
Did you have to consult with Patrick Gowers to make sure to eliminate music there? Did you need to make sure that it was going to be silent, or was that something Patrick Gowers was in simpatico with you on?
Yeah, we were absolutely in agreement with that.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing about English composers is they don't want to fill a film with music.
Yeah.
Their idea is that music helps in the moments where there is emotion or there is some other kind of feeling that you want to portray with or without the actors and where it's actually going, like taking a camera up to the second floor window.
Right.
So it's not like here we have wall-to-wall music and everything in America, but in England it's selected, and it's very carefully selected. And so I don't remember talking much about Rafifi, which means that we both decided that it shouldn't have music.
Right.
And Patrick may have said it shouldn't have music, but more often it was me saying, "Should we have a bit of music here?" And he would go, "No,
Yeah.
no, it's terrible. What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
It's to tell you how I was usually treated by everybody over there.
I do want to jump back to Musgrave Ritual because I'm fearful we'll run out of time and we still have so many questions. But
I'm good.
okay.
I love this stuff as much as you do.
Great.
So the Musgrave Ritual, by this point, the show was a huge international success, but also there had been a bit of a change of the guard, I guess, at Granada with June Wyndham Davies taking the reins from Michael Cox. What was the dynamic like with June on set versus Michael Cox? I mean, if you could speak to that a little bit. It seems like there's not a lot of information out there about or from June Wyndham Davies and her time on the series. So we're always interested to hear, what it was like to work with June.
Well, June, the habit in England in the TV then is to be hands off and not to do things, to understand that there are. Now, Michael was an executive. He was a producer, but June also directed. So she knew, what we were going through most of the time. Yes, absolutely. And there's a funny story attached to Musgrave Ritual to do with Michael. Would you like to know about that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are certain scenes in the movie that took place in the cellar across the moat, and then there was a scene in the stables where the butler is going after, I can't remember her name. What's the name of the character? Doesn't matter, but you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Brilliant performance, by the way, absolutely stunning performance.
Yeah.
But and that. Now, when we came to the day before the end, that was my last day. We'd always been talking, Michael and I, on the phone about how I was falling behind because these lakes and moats and things were getting in my way.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically said, "Well, it's okay. I'll see if I can get you some more time, and because you're obviously going to slip over." And so that day, the day before the last day, I called him and I said, "So can we schedule the next few days so that we can see what he said?" He said, "Oh, David, I'm so sorry. I haven't got you any more time." I said, "But I'm 3 days behind or 2 days behind. What do you want me to do?" He said, "Well, I'm afraid you've got to finish it." So we were in a place where we were digging holes in the ground and people were getting filthy, and it was just very, very hard to do. But we did that 3 days work in one day.
Wow.
And that's why, for example, the scene upstairs between the two lovers when he's trying to inveigle her to go out with him, that's all done in one shot.
Yeah.
Because I think we had, something like 8 minutes to spare to do that show. But they were so great. The actors were absolutely terrific.
Yeah.
And so that was the one time really that I can remember that we talked with Michael. And then June was very hands-on because she took over during the edit of the Musgrave Ritual. So she was looking at how we were editing it and everything. And at the end of the Musgrave Ritual, there is the time was a little tight, and there's a scene where the servant girl puts a little boat in the water and the dead body floats up underneath it.
Yeah.
I'd written that scene as a great long scene. She comes up to the edge of the thing and sits down and makes a boat and floats the boat, and then you've got 5 minutes on the screen. And we were cutting it and editing it like that. And June came and watched the thing and she said, it's wonderful, but here's what I would do as a director. I would move beyond the making of it and go to the body. So she said, I don't know how you want to do that, but that's my note.
Yeah.
Move beyond it, go to the body. So that's why, because of her note, that's why the shot started with the boat being put into the water. And so you suddenly got two shots telling the story really, really simply to get it going. Up comes the body, and then all hell breaks loose.
Right.
And she ends up as Ophelia in the lake.
Right.
So that was her contribution, which to me is a very creative contribution, because the producer, hopefully, is the only person, unlike here, is the only person who hasn't been watching what you've been doing. They've seen dailies maybe, but they haven't seen the cut together yet.
Yeah.
So your best pair of eyes is a producer who cares about the movie and lets you get on with it, and then comes and gives you notes once you've done it, rather than, as often happens, people who are harassing you the entire time for this, that, and the other thing. Let the people do what they want to do. So that was the difference between those two, my experiences with them both.
Well, coming back to Jeremy Brett for a moment, he went through some difficult times between The Resident Patient and The Musgrave Ritual. Did you find him much changed when you were together on set for Musgrave Ritual, or was he just the same old Jeremy? Or were you even aware of his troubles then?
Yes, I knew what was going on, but I mean, it all got very much worse after I stopped working on the series. But he was just as incredibly committed to the work he was doing than to let anything get in the way of it. I mean, he was a real professional actor with many, many years of dealing with, all sorts of emotional things and other such stuff, which he'd got through. And so he didn't allow that to bleed so much into the movie, except that some of the things that we did, like having him all cuddled up and having a terrible cold and laughing maniacally because he's taken too much cocaine, were perhaps something that helped that. And he wanted to be just a little bit more outrageous than he was, like falling asleep on the evidence bed at the end of the day, and being a little funnier than he had been. So he was delighted in the various things that happen. You can see when they do the sort of the wind in the willows chase through the woods, counting out things, that he's almost over the top with his glee.
Yeah.
And then his shots take, in the boat, he just loved that, standing in the boat, going across the boat.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, but he's sort of, I suppose, such an extraordinarily committed artist, I should say. He's a creator of this character that he can, he doesn't have to have everything bleed into it.
Right.
I think when he got sicker later, when I wasn't with the company anymore, I think that that may have been different, but it wasn't different as far as I was concerned. I mean, you can see in the Musgrave Ritual, he's doing all these things that are so accurate as well.
Yeah.
Like the focus pulling shot I told you about, when we have the crown being made. If he's asked to put a piece of jewelry or something like the Blue Carbuncle into the shot so that his eyes are in focus and it's out of focus, but we can pull focus to it, he'll put it in exactly the right place. It was quite stunning, because I'd never really been aware of those kinds of skills from actors before, because I was relatively new to it.
You could definitely tell he knew where his light was and where the camera was.
Oh, yes.
All the time. I mean, that's again one of those things that we obsess about. His little hand gestures that are just they're just always right, and they're always in the shot, and they're great.
That's right.
Well, and talking about obsessing, Luke and I actually took something of a pilgrimage to Baddesley Clinton when last time we were in England, and for anyone who hasn't been, it's well worth the visit. It's a wonderful place, rich in history. I do have a question about those grounds, and I know Luke has another question, but we could not locate the giant oak. Was that there, or was that shot in a different location?
No, that was there.
We couldn't find it. It's not straight across from the house, or at least
we should say, though. I mean, we were there on a schedule, so we got to go in the house and look around. We were in the visitor center in the garden, but we couldn't find it.
It wasn't in the garden.
Okay.
It was up the hill of the meadow. There was a meadow behind the house, and the oak is at the top of the meadow.
Okay. Yeah, we didn't go. I don't think we went that direction.
Yeah.
But speaking of that, was the house chosen for this episode specifically, because like we knew some of the history of the priest hides that were inside, and I wondered if that's kind of why it was chosen, or if
Yes.
things were modified because of the house.
No, we shot the house sort of as it was. We found our way around the house. I mean, the designer, Michael Grimes, who was just a brilliant designer, found the house. I remember him coming to me and saying, look, I've been looking up and down England to see where this house is. And I'd come to you and say, we've got 4 houses or 3 houses, but there's only one house that you can shoot this in. And I was going, oh, is that right? I can't go off and see the others. And he took me to see it, and he showed me how he saw it and his vision for it. The only problem was there was no oak. The oak was outside the bleeding grounds, and it had to be inside.
Yeah.
And so we looked around and thought, what can we do? And then we came up with the idea of, the wind pennant, because it had a fox on it, as they so often do in England. So we took the fox off and put an oak there. And that's how the oak came to be on top of the wind pennant and and we could make the play between a real oak and a model oak.
Right.
But the big oak was terrific. Yeah. And the whole house was a National House Trust property, which they really didn't want us messing around with and shooting in.
I mean, when we were there were signs everywhere and things like, don't touch this. There was little placards over everything. And I wondered if you had to shoot around those kind of things, because when they first go in the house, it's this great big room, and it felt like you were using a lot of tight lenses, a lot of long lenses. And I wondered if there was a reason for that, or if that was just what you chose on that day.
No, I think that's what we chose on that day. I mean, they have a Bayeux tapestry in the house. You probably saw it.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting detail about this shoot is that the payment for the location was $15,000 to restore the Bayeux tapestry, £15,000.
Interesting.
That's how we got in there in the first place. But we had to put all sorts of coverings on the old oak floors, which were, had floorboards which were a foot wide, and we could not bring any weight-bearing equipment in there, heavy equipment, because the floors would not stand the weight. But I think we wanted to bring them into the house with one size, and then later when we use that room, that's the grand room, the one with the stone and everything in it. We wanted to open it up a bit while they were talking about the ritual, so that it started by being a little bit claustrophobic and then revealed itself as we went along.
Right.
But I'll tell you a funny story about the oak.
Yeah.
And English, how we do things in England. We'd had wonderful weather. The weather was absolutely great while we'd been inside the house, and we were due to go outside the house at lunchtime and shoot around the tree. And the heavens opened and it poured with rain. And so the line producer was saying, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to stop shooting and everything and all that? Perhaps we should shoot very tightly. And I said, no, look at that tree. It's so wonderful. Have we got the umbrellas, that'll pass as period umbrellas? Well, we've got old black umbrellas. And I went, okay, we're going to shoot in the rain. And so that's how those wonderful, wonderful shots of the umbrellas under the tree happened.
Yeah.
Because we went and shot in the rain, which you do in England, but not so much over here.
Right.
But the thing to think about for that shot, how brilliant Jeremy's mind is when he's doing something artistic. It's not just about him and about other things. It's about the whole element of the shot. And if Jeremy hadn't held the umbrella the way he did, the shot would not have been good. 3 dwarves underneath umbrellas. He held it right up in the air, so it was like the apex of a triangle.
Right.
And even when he was underneath the tree, he lowers it grandly and walks forward, and it looks as if, it's just his ability to tell what his physicality did for the camera and for the feeling of the film was just absolutely stunning.
Unparalleled.
Yeah, even 100 yards away.
That's right.
I mean, that shot that you're talking about, it's like that wonderful silhouette. It's like a painting.
Yes, I think it was a wonderful tree, and it was at that tree that my grumpy cameraman crew and everybody gave me my reward, because I was determined I was going to get the shot right and that we could do it, because I didn't want to have above the mound. I just wanted the tree to be there without any background. So in order to do that, I took my little lens privately and went and found where I thought the camera should be. And then we went to rehearse it. And you had to lie down in the long grass and look through the long grass to get the tree all by itself without the background hills.
Mm-hmm.
I remember them coming and saying, and I mapped out the scene, said he's going to go over here. The horse is going to come down towards us. And they're going to walk up there, the horse coming all by itself. And the cameraman said, well, okay, and looked at the operator and said, I think we'll be all right over here, don't you? And I walked over to the place I'd found and I said, I think this is, come and look at this. And they went over there and looked at me and looked down at the grass and said, it's wet. And the DP said, come on, lie down. So the operator lay down with his lens and looked at it. And then he looked back at the DP and he said, he's right. And so that was my acceptance.
Yeah.
It was an important learning moment for me.
Yeah. Speaking of this house, we're kind of quite particular about speaking about the differences between the story and the episode. And there were some slight differences in the actual ritual itself. And I wondered if it was a decision made, based on the location, trying, to make it make sense within the grounds, or...
That was the reason.
Okay.
So that we could count out the various things that we had to do and make sure that the tree had the right trigonometrical, whatever it was, from where the new tree, which we'd added. And so it all could measure out.
Yeah.
I remember we did change it a little bit.
And I guess if we would have had time, we could have probably recreated the ritual.
We could have walked it.
Yes, you could. At the beginning of the driveway there's you probably remember there are two large acorns on a wall on either side of the driveway in the front of the house.
Yeah.
And this house was only existed because Cromwell couldn't find it in the Reformation. And so that's why it didn't get destroyed in the Reformation with so many other castles. And it had survived all these many, many years. And for the first time, for all these centuries, one of the acorns was knocked off its stand and fell on the ground and was damaged because we had electricians who backed a truck into it.
Oh, wow.
It was just so ironic that a film goes there and knocks an acorn off onto the ground after it survived all these. Anyway.
You guys did what Cromwell couldn't.
Exactly. We destroy everything.
Well, let's move on to the Six Napoleons.
Yes.
Which arguably contains one of the most moving moments in the entire Granada series.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I refer to the moment between Lestrade and Holmes at the end. And so I'm bound to ask, the tears in Jeremy's eyes, was this in the script? Was this your call? Was this purely Jeremy? How did this moment come about?
It wasn't in the script.
Okay.
This was Jeremy. I mean, so nobody talked about him crying or anything. One just left it to Jeremy, and that's what he decided. And he was right.
Yeah.
I mean, he's a brilliant creative artist. You're absolutely right. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. It's a stunning moment between the two of them.
Yeah.
Six Napoleons was interesting because it had a lot more stuff in it than some of the others. We expanded my habit of making the new beginnings on shows. And I think it was good because of that. I don't think I was not aware that purists have attacked us too much, although I've seen something saying, oh, well, the mafia should have been left alone, just as a brief mention.
Yeah.
But I think it filled the episode well and was able to give it a slightly different environment to many of the others.
Right.
And I could play with my, Truffaut moments and my Madame Bovary moments and all those kinds of things.
This one also feels just so much more like a mystery than a couple of the other episodes we've discussed in the past. Like, these are great episodes, they're amazing, but the mystery is just secondary to the story. And in this one, it's all mystery.
Right.
Well, I do think that's true, but I also think that it gave us a terrific opportunity, not only to do the moving scene at the end, but to make an episode, which I think this is about, between Holmes and Lestrade.
Yeah.
The whole thing about the hunting and going after him and getting things right and falling asleep in the hut and being woken up by the guy chasing around the room and then popping up from behind the hedge and using sort of relatively warm comic things in order to, take us away from the desperation of this guy doing whatever he was doing with the stuff and focus on the relationship between the three men stuck in the middle of nowhere, trying to go to sleep and arguing about
humbugs. Yeah.
Yes, humbugs. That's right.
This is no time for humbugs.
That's right.
Yeah.
So to me, that's more what it was about. That framed against this Italian sort of mafioso kill for revenge, the killing of blah blah and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That happens and then gets solved in the end by a return to the barber shop, where good old Holmes comes across the street in his dressing gown, and he is seen, spied upon by Mr. Hardwick through the barber's thing, so that it comes to ground. But then again, I wanted to make sure the ending was sorted out, so we did the rain scene with them outside the prison,
Right.
and the old man going to read the thing, and then the Madame Bovary reference, if you want it, is when the carriage goes away, and she tears up the note and drops it out of the window, and it flutters away,
Right.
into nowhere.
Yeah. It really is, I think, in the entire series, the very best Lestrade episode, and Colin Jevons it's such an amazing performance in it too. So, I mean,
Yeah, they did really well.
Speaking of the casting, was it your choice, or was it Judy Hayfield, or did you guys work together to cast Eric Sykes to play Harker, or was
that was my idea?
How did that come together? I mean, did you just reach out to him? Did you guys know each other?
No, I just reached out. I mean, he's been such a big figure in English comedy for so long,
Yeah,
and such a wonderful thing. And he'd just done a wonderful film, which you may have seen, black and white film called The Plank. It's really, really, really a wonderful piece of just gentle comedy. It's not like pratfalls, but it's about what a guy who has a plank has to do with it during a day to get it from one place to another. It's just beautifully done, and I just wanted to have somebody play that role who had some particular personality about him, who he could bring to it, and Eric brought it all. I first met him talking about this role, and he said, I remember him saying, "Well, one of the problems about acting in films for me is I'm deaf. I can't hear anything.
yeah.
You see, so I don't know what's going on." He said, "I did a film called Shalako, in which he played a servant." He said, we had to all ride out, and I was on this burro, this mule, because I was a servant, and I never knew when it was going to start, because what they did was they were too far away to shout action for the shots going across the hillside or whatever it was. So they fired a gun. And when they fired a gun, my burro went crazy. He just went off, and I had to hang on for dear life, he said, which all just made it all funnier.
Yeah.
So I said to him, "So what do you do when I say action or something like that?" He goes, "Oh, well, just give me a nod and I'll know you're going to go."
Yeah.
He was wearing glasses at the time as we were talking about that. I said, "Where are your hearing aids?" He said, "Oh, they're in my glasses." I said, "Oh." And he just put his hand through where the lens is meant to be. I said, "Yes, see, these are just for show, but the hearing aid is in the glasses thing, which holds my glasses on," which he, of course, couldn't wear in Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
So that was it. But it was a pleasure having such a great comedian, great actor working on the set with me. It was wonderful.
Well, speaking of casting, I want to ask you possibly a scandalous question. Maybe the most contentious fan disagreement that we know of all the canon is who's the very most loved Watson among all the Watsons, and it always comes down to a tie between David Burke, Edward Hardwicke. And since you've worked with both of them, we wondered what it was like, the differences, if you have a favorite.
No, I don't really. I think that they're really good, but in completely different ways. In a way, I suppose, I think that Edward was probably the one that takes it, because when Jeremy and David were together, there wasn't the age difference. Mm-hmm. And David Burke being befuddled was not as believable as having Edward Hardwicke's Watson be somewhat befuddled and astonished. It was almost like sometimes David Burke could almost have cottoned on to what Holmes was talking about. So I think there are really good things about both of them. And while I was catching up on a couple of them before we had our chat, I thought, well, it certainly works.
Yeah. But
maybe Edward takes it.
Now for the big question on everyone's mind.
I didn't do it, sir. I didn't do it.
You touched on this before, but the tablecloth poll that Jeremy Brett does, real or showbiz magic?
Real.
Yeah?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We had a magician come in, taught him how to do it. The cups had to be exactly the right kind of cups and all of that. And the first attempt smashed everything all over the place. But we practiced it. And in fact, there's a little hiccup in the last one he does. The cloth just gets caught slightly, I think, and a cup moves.
Hmm.
But that was the last set of cups we had, so he had to just get it right. But I remember it was like the violin.
Yeah.
Jeremy didn't like to do things that he couldn't do, so he wouldn't have let it be a trick.
Right.
I think you can see in the cutting that we don't cut away from it all of a sudden, or in the middle of it, or somewhere else to make it set up. It was the actual thing that happened.
Well, and presumably this episode was the first time you had ever worked with Marina Sirtis.
Aha.
Yeah, must have been a fun reunion. What must have been like 3 years later when you guys did the first Next Generation episode?
Yeah, no, it was a bit later, I think.
Really?
Yes, 89, I think I did. The first was my first Next Generation thing.
Yeah, so a few years later.
6 years, a few years later. Yes, oh yes. It was her first job.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Yep, and she couldn't speak Italian.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she did a remarkable job.
Yeah,
for that,
she was great.
Right?
Absolutely.
And the guy who played her brother did speak Italian.
Oh, okay. We were curious about that.
Yeah.
Well, David, what is next for you? What are you working on now?
Well, I'm not working on Sherlock Holmes. I'm doing a movie called Heartland, which is a film which we're about to start shooting, hopefully in the next couple of months in New Zealand.
Mm.
It's a UK-New Zealand co-production, and is basically the easiest way to describe it is that it's like Lord of the Flies meets 28 Days Later.
Nice.
So it's about a virus, and which leaves all the children alone. So they have to find, like in Lord of the Flies, they have to make but it's specific reference to today happens now.
Right.
So it can be, it's basically a horror film. And if you wanted to genre it, I don't know. Well, I think a horror film is probably, zombie, you could call it a zombie movie because of what happens to the adults when the virus hits and how the children deal with all of that. And that's that one. And then I'm doing another different kind of horror film after that, called The Benefactor, which is starring Malcolm McDowell, who, of course, I worked with in Star Trek, and we've been close together, and that's our next project after the Heartland.
Nice. I have to ask, because I am just such a fan, any chance you'll be returning to the universe of Star Trek anytime soon?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
No, no, because it's it's different. It's a different kind of a thing. Patrick and I get on very well. He's actually a executive producer on another of my films called Boat 2142, which is about the end of the Vietnam War, and it's about the abuse of women. And of course, Patrick this is one of the big things that he does.
Yeah.
But I stopped doing all of that so that I could do films like these right now, or try to.
Yeah.
Without ever really being a producer beforehand. It was obvious that if I wanted to do something like that, I had to stop doing, the TV and the other things.
Yeah, of course.
That I'd been lucky enough to do it.
Well, you gave us quite a body of work, especially with the Star Trek stuff. So we fans have more than enough to enjoy from you, and we appreciate that.
Well, thank you.
Well, David, there's so much more I feel like we could ask you, but you have been so generous with your time today. And so on behalf of Holmes fans everywhere, we just want to thank you for what you brought to this series. You and the folks at Granada really created something timeless, and it's been a real pleasure to speak with you.
Well, thank you. And likewise, a pleasure to speak with you.